right, and welcome to another episode of Butler's Babble, where we aim to empower, motivate, and inspire you to live the best lives that you can. And we do that with having different guests on here that's gone through some troubled times, and they want to share it with you and hope that they can help you out. Before we go on, I just want to mention that if you've never seen another episode of Butler's Babble, be sure to go to youtube.com/@Butler's Babble, subscribe, hit the little bell there, and check out some of the other awesome episodes with some amazing people on there that I totally will inspire you, I'm sure. But today we have an amazing young lady we met a few months back, and I knew we had to get her on our show, that she definitely has a story that I'm sure you're going to love and learn from. And very good speaker, and she's a #1 international best-selling author. She's the CEO of Lift by Selina. She's a TEDx speaker, a singer-songwriter, and of course, how I met her was she is a fitness cover model for different magazines. And so we're going to bring Selina in. This is Selina Hinojosa. Selina, how are you doing?
Hi, just fine. How's it going?
Not too bad. Did I get most of that right?
Oh, everything was great.
Okay, perfect. I'm always afraid that I get something wrong when I say it. I'm always reading it, but hey, you never know.
No,
But yeah, we met
perfect.
a couple months back through our good friend Sarah, who I do another podcast with in the fitness industry. And you had mentioned to me in our pre-interview that you had a story that you think my audience would be interested in. And so
Yeah.
you and I got our little meeting going, and I totally agreed with you. It was something we had to get out there. So
Yes, thank you.
no, thank you. So why don't you then start off giving us just a brief history about Selina? Give us some little things about little Selina growing up.
All right. Well, little Selina grew up here where I still live in Corpus Christi, Texas. I grew up in a barrio, which is a blue-collared, predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. So we didn't grow up with a whole lot. We lived a really simple life, but we had a lot of love in the family. And I went to an elementary school, and my neighborhood was called Los Encinos. And as a little girl in school, I was gifted and talented, always excellent grades. I was a little nerd. I loved science, and I loved to read. I really excelled, especially in reading and writing. And so I was a very, very good student. It wasn't until I hit maybe high school that I had some issues, which I'm sure we'll discuss here in a little bit. But other than that, I was active in school. I was on the jump rope team in elementary school, and we did little parades and things like that. And like I said, I really loved science, anything having to do with science. So I would, even outside of school, I was always either with the animals outside, or I was trying to grow things. Like I was planting little plants in cups and containers. I really liked getting my hands dirty.
And you were saying you grew up in like a blue collar Hispanic family. Is that like a community too? Not just where your family, but was the community you lived in, was it more of a Hispanic community?
Yeah. It was the neighborhood was Los Encinos, which it translates to the trees. The encinos is a type of tree.
Okay.
And I think I don't recall other than Hispanics that lived there. I think it was a predominantly Hispanic neighborhood. And like I said, we didn't have a whole lot. It was a very humble neighborhood. But my parents provided us with everything that we needed. Maybe not everything that we wanted, right? But we definitely had everything that we needed.
Which is all you need. I know my daughters always, they would come home from school sometimes and they would want certain things. And they were like, well, so-and-so gets this, or their dad buys them this. And I'm like, well, I'm not their dad. We made sure they had the necessities. They didn't need every little toy that was on the market, but we made sure they didn't do without either.
That's right. That's right.
But I think also, like, even when my daughter, when she was ready, when she was turning to the age of driving and she was getting a car, she's 22 now, my oldest daughter. But when she was getting to that age and she wanted to buy a car, we helped her out. We told her, like, we'll take care of the taxes and stuff, but you got to come up with the cost of the car itself, because I
Mm,
find that if they pay for it themselves, especially a big investment like that, they're going to take care of it.
mhm.
If you just buy it and give it to them, it's not their money. They're not really.
Right.
But I agree with you. If it's you got to let them know what hard work is.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And I'm instilling that in my boys right now.
Definitely.
But yeah, we lived a simple life. There were four of us. I was one of four, and I was the baby. My dad is he was a retired he now is a retired firefighter. So he had a very good career. My mom stayed home with us.
Okay.
So although my dad had a great career, it was only one income. Because my mom was always that mom that was always at the school, the
Okay.
PTA president. She was always there for field trips and events. And my parents still today, they're amazing people. They're still married 50, gosh, 55 plus years that they've been
Wow.
married. And yeah, they show a lot of love toward each other,
Good.
which has carried on into my life now as well.
And I can see that
They
because
they set a great example.
exactly, and that's what I find too. If you got that good family atmosphere, like my wife and I are not afraid to show affection in front of our kids too. And
Yeah.
growing up, the kids like, oh, that's gross. Oh, mom, dad. But I find that they do. You don't be afraid to show that in front of your kids. Why hide it? Because then you're making
That's
it
right.
seem like it's something bad when it's really
Right.
not. It's
No, it's
show that
not at
you're
all.
loving that, and like you said, it probably instilled to you and your siblings at the same time.
And that's the way it should be. My when it comes to watching their marriage, of course they had their little ups and downs and financial issues and here and there, but for the most part, I never saw my parents being disrespectful to each other. They were never these crazy huge arguments. They always showed love and affection toward each other, and they still do today.
That's good.
And as far as um the men in my life, my dad set a really high standard, because he's the best man in the world aside from my
Oh,
husband. So so it was like, um, my dad set such a high standard that I'm so grateful that he did, because I found um, a man whom I'm married to today that is just as wonderful as my father.
mhm. And they say that too, that a lot of women, and maybe guys to an extent, but I think it's more women, they do seem
Yeah.
to gravitate more to people that are like their dad.
Yes.
Not that they're having like this father complex or anything, but it's more
No. No.
you learn what to look for in a man by how your dad handled himself, and you want something like
Yes.
that a lot of times. And I do see that
Yes.
happening.
And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful because, like I said, my parents are wonderful people, and anything less than that uh, would not have. I wouldn't have been satisfied with anything else. And so I'm really grateful that they showed me what is to be expected
Mhm.
in a wife and in a husband and in a marriage.
Exactly, and I grew up like you. I grew up with 3 siblings. I'm actually the second of 4, and we had all
Okay.
boys in my family. So my poor mom,
Oh
she had my dad
wow!
and
So
4 boys. So
you're one of four brothers, four
yes, I'm
sons.
I'm the second oldest of 4 brothers, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, so we grew up the only good thing about that is hand-me-downs, kind of good and kind of bad because, like, I would get my brother's hand-me-downs, but
Yeah.
then by the time my next brother under me needed some stuff, that he mostly got the new stuff because my
Oh, so
stuff
you
is
got
all
skipped.
went through 2 people, it's all old now, or it's just not the style anymore, so he'd get all the
Yeah.
new stuff, of course, so, um, but yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean, and I grew up in a big family like that too, and I think it actually molded me into who I am today,
Sure.
and it does I find, it does help me in a lot of the stuff that I do go through with relationships, whether it be personal or, um, family relationships, anything is having a big family like that. You learn because we lived in a small house and, we had to
Mm.
learn to get along because there wasn't any
Right.
room for you to go somewhere else. You basically had to learn
That's
to get
right.
along and,
Yeah.
to know
And you
people's
have to
differences.
learn, to share. You have to learn how to deal with different personalities. in the home. And because it's not just about you. Life is not just centered around you. And so coming from a big family, especially in that kind of humble environment, um, I feel like that's where I learned all of those, precious teaching moments, is living in a household, a big household.
No, definitely. So growing up like that, you must have had like a great like friendships around your neighborhood. You're probably going out a lot, hanging out a lot outside. You were probably a very active person, as I can see. I know
Yeah,
you were
we
into books and
spent
reading, but I'm sure you were active too.
yeah, we spent a lot of time outside. Although again, we lived in a humble neighborhood, but we had a big yard. And so we spent a lot of time outside, and our house seemed to be the house and the yard where the other neighborhood kids would come and play, because it was a big corner house. We had
Mhm.
a big yellow corner house. And so, and it was all fenced in. And so that's where a lot of the kids came and hung out. My parents, they raised us relatively sheltered, not overly protective, but we weren't running out in the streets, or we weren't here and there. We never went anywhere without our parents knowing where we were. And if
Mhm.
we did, if we did leave the yard, um, my I was always the tag along to my older sister. So we were always together. Back then, of course, there were no cell phones. So if we did walk down to the street to our friend's house, we'd have to call when we got there, and we'd have to call when we were leaving. So yeah, my parents always made sure that we were safe and secure.
No, I know exactly what you mean. And the reason that I've went on a little bit longer with this than I would with normal
Mhm.
other people is because once we get to your story, of course, I'm trying to set a baseline for it, because most people think that when people go through certain traumas or certain down points in their life, it's because it's always to do with their upbringing. It's always to
Yes.
do with, and I'm not saying that's not true. I mean, a lot of times it does happen where you look back
Yeah.
in time and you say, well, he didn't have a good father figure. He didn't have a good mother figure, or she didn't, or they went through some abuse in there as a child. Like something's usually triggered something that's happened. And
Yes.
and I just, you seem to be to me just a little bit different in that way, that you
I'm
had a
s
great upbringing, you had great parents, you had great siblings, you had a great neighborhood, you were good in
Yes.
school,
Yeah.
and it just makes your story unique, I think. And so you're going
Yes,
through high school.
yes.
Was it in the middle of high school that this all started, or?
Well, just backtracking just a tad bit, I'm so glad that you brought that up, John, because that's one of the things, that I speak about when I'm talking about the things that I went through, is that there is a misconception around addiction and depression, that all of our problems, all of my problems stemmed from something in my childhood. Um, of course, my childhood wasn't perfect, right?
Mhm.
But for the most part, we had a normal household, and my parents always did the very best they could and loved us. So it was really nothing um, that they did. I have never been the one to play the victim. You
Mhm.
know, it was just what the things that I went through that we'll talk about were just bad decisions that just kind of just got out of control.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
So
you're, this was in high school though, you were saying?
yeah, so I got through middle school, and then in high school it was probably around my uh, probably freshman year. You
Okay.
know, I was a I was kind of an introvert. I wouldn't say I was painfully shy, but I was a little bit of an introvert. And so talking to new people and just kind of introducing myself to new people was a little bit difficult for me. It didn't just come naturally to me, And so I think many of us, or all of us, can relate to wanting to fit in, right? especially at that age. Fitting in high school, your freshman year is like everything. It's the world
Mhm.
to you. And so I remember at that age that I wanted to fit in. And so that was around the time that um, I started getting invited to parties after the football game and things like that. And not to say that these kids were a bad crowd or anything like that. It was just, there was drinking involved most of the time. And I'll never forget, it was the homecoming football game night, right? And so it was a big deal, homecoming game. Um, and then the next night I think was the homecoming dance. And so afterwards, a whole bunch of us we all pitched in and we rented a hotel room, and a bunch of kids were going to go after the dance to this hotel room. And we had pre-bought a whole bunch of wine coolers and beer and this and that. And so after the dance, a bunch of us got together in this hotel room. And I don't know if you recall this, John, but do you remember Boone's Strawberry Hill wine?
No, I don't actually.
It was this disgusting. I think they still have it. It's just this gross, cheap wine, and
Okay.
it's the size of a wine bottle, but it's like super cheap. And we each had one of those, and it was like uh everyone had their own bottle, and it was like we were all encouraging each other to chug. And I chugged that bottle down, John, in one gulp. And a few minutes later, I felt this sensation that I had never felt before. And
Mhm.
it was the best thing I ever experienced. And I thought, where have you been all my life? It was just
Mhm.
the best thing, I thought. Um, and then throughout the rest of that school year, there were several nights like that we all just got together at so and so's house and here and there, and there was drinking involved. um and I can honestly say that I think that I got addicted to alcohol within the first, if not the first time that I drank it, but within the first few times that I drank alcohol. I mean, I was just addicted to it. And I knew that I liked it more, and I was doing it more than even the other kids that had introduced it to me.
Okay. Now, your home growing up in your home life, did your parents drink even just casually, or was it just
Um, John, I remember, like, my dad, I said he was a firefighter,
yeah.
and maybe once every few months,
Mhm.
um, some of his firefighter friends would come together and their wives, and maybe they'd have a
Sure.
barbecue in the backyard. And we're talking about just maybe some beers here and there with their barbecue,
Yeah,
but
just a casual
never,
drinker.
yeah, they never got sloppy or
No.
belligerent or anything like that. Um, my mom would maybe fix herself a drink now and then, but there was never an abundance of alcohol in
Nope.
our house, or I never saw that type of behavior regularly.
Mhm. No, and that's good because I know with that kind of profession too, and I'm not gonna stereotype all firefighters, of course, but that type of
No,
profession, the
yeah,
things that they see on the job and the things they have to go through, I'm sure there's a lot of them that do turn to stuff like alcohol and drugs and things like
sure.
that, and
I'm
it's nice
sure,
to see
yes.
yours didn't, like, yours just had a great thing, and the only reason I also asked that was because you're saying this all started around freshman year, which you look back, that's, like, roughly 14 years old to some people 15 years old,
Yeah,
but mostly around the
about
14.
15, 16,
Yeah.
around there. Hmm.
Yeah, because normally graduation, you're around 17, 18. So, I mean,
Right.
that's very young, and I'm sure a lot
That's
of
young.
us tested back at that age too. You grade 9, grade
Yeah.
10, you're high school, you feel like you're an adult now, even though you're not, and you try to stuff
Right.
like that. And your story is very similar to another guest we had on way back, I think it was like my second episode, my friend Rob Peranche. That was his thing too, was alcohol. And His started in his teens also and went into his
Mm,
early 20s. So I mean, it seems to be that seems to be the same theme as he took his drink, and once he did, he's like, "Whoa, what is this?" And that's
yeah.
that hook right there. That's what gets you.
And John, and one of the things that I like to talk about is that it all started very, just like the gentleman you're talking about now. It all started kind of innocently.
Mhm.
It was just fun. High school homecoming dance. You Of course, I didn't set out to be an alcoholic. I never thought that it would lead to what
Mhm.
it did and wreak such havoc in my life.
No,
It,
definitely.
and and then the problem with alcohol is that oftentimes when you're under the influence, it leads to other things. So
Yeah.
it's not just the problem with the alcohol itself, but the things that take place, the mistakes that you make, and then the introduction to maybe even other drugs
Yeah.
that I never would have ever would have thought that I would try if I weren't drunk.
Now were you more of you were very reluctant and it was forced, it was more of a peer pressure thing that got you started, and then from there you just took off? Or was it more you're just having a good time with the friends and they're like,
Yeah,
"Hey, here, try this." Yeah, okay, I'll try it. It wasn't really peer
yeah.
pressure. You just tried it and you liked it.
No, no, it was never anything forced or anyone making me do anything that I didn't want to do. Um, I wanted to have fun and I wanted to fit in,
Mhm.
and so it was all just kind of a casual, fun thing.
Okay. And this went
Yeah.
through all of high school, basically. This was a new thing for you. Now, did you get into anything harder through high school, or did any of that happen later
Yeah.
on in life? Or is this when it just this is the start, and then between then and graduation, you started going like, did it affect your grades too, getting into all
Oh
this stuff?
gosh, yes. Yeah, it started out with the alcohol and then my freshman year and then into my maybe sophomore and junior year hanging out with different crowds here and there. I was introduced to marijuana, and even that, John, it was like not a big deal.
Mhm.
Kids would pull out a joint here and there, and it wasn't a big deal. Um, but looking back, I think for me, it just there was a switch that turned on in my brain when I
Mhm.
drank that alcohol, when I smoked that weed. It was just something that, like you use the word hook. I mean, it
Yeah.
just hooked me, and I feel like the the drive to do it more and more often was it was stronger in me than
Okay.
the other kids around me. So yeah, I started smoking a lot throughout the rest of my high school years. Um, Grades were always so important to me. From elementary and middle school, I mean, I always had straight A's, and um, it was around like my junior year and especially my senior year that they weren't as important to me, or to the end, they weren't important at all, you
Mhm.
know? Um, so I always had hopes, and my parents also had hopes for me of graduating high school and going to college. But toward the end of my high school year, um, I just couldn't see that for myself. It just didn't seem like something I even wanted to do or even cared about doing.
Okay.
Um, but so after graduation, I did attend our local community college here in Corpus, still living with my parents. And I mean, I was either drunk or hungover
Okay.
most of the time. And so I attended a few, I think maybe a semester and a half at that, of classes, just my basics. But the addiction was pretty out of control by that time,
Mhm.
that I ended up dropping out just because the addiction had such a strong hold on me by that time.
Okay. And also with your high school and that, did you find that once you started getting into this and then getting into a little bit more heavier stuff sometimes, did it affect your friendships too? Did you start losing friends or gaining different friends, or did those friends go along with you, or they just didn't care? Like, did any of them take on the same path as you and you guys just did it together? Or was it more you just did it and they didn't care? Because I know some
Yeah,
people that lose
well,
friends along the way because, like, well, if you're going to keep doing that, we don't want anything to do with you, and you have to get new friends. And
right. The transition from middle school to high school, I went to a different school district in high school. So all of my middle school friends had gone to a whole other school. So going into high school, um, they were all new people to begin with.
Mhm.
So, and that was, I think, part of the yearning to fit in, because these were kids that all kind of knew each other, and I didn't really know them. I didn't go to middle school with them. So I wanted to be able to fit in with them. Um, and they were all kind of doing it. So it was up to me to either be an outcast or join in, you
Yeah,
know?
no, it makes sense. And so you get through high school, you go to college, you do, like you said, like a year and a half, I guess it was, semesters
Yep.
wise. You drop
Yep.
out. Where do you go from there? Because now like, is it a type of thing where, like, some people say they hit rock bottom? Do you have your family? Do they know
Re-
what's going on?
Oh, they had no idea of the extent
Okay.
what I was doing. They knew that I would kind of come home sometimes, a little tipsy, or smelling my alcohol, or coming home too late. But I think my parents really thought that it was just kind of like a typical phase,
Yeah.
a typical partying phase.
Yeah,
They
just get
didn't
going and
know.
having some fun.
Yeah, they didn't know that I continued drinking more by myself, or they didn't know um the problems that I was having. And even at that point, John, after high school and into my mid 20s, I didn't even think I had a problem.
Mhm.
I just thought, what's the big deal? I just like doing this. It's You don't see it at that time.
No.
At least I didn't see it at that time. And so in my parents' defense, they just didn't realize the extent of the problem at that time.
Okay.
Um, and so I was still living with my parents, and I had dropped out of college, which I'm sure, was really disappointing to them, because I was always such a great student and had so much potential. So I'm sure that was really disappointing to them. So I knew that I needed to do something. And at that time, I was working at a local gym.
Okay.
And one of the trainers there just kind of took me under her wing, and she encouraged me to get my personal training certification.
Okay.
And so that led to me getting certified. And I just seemed to have a really good knack of fitness and training. And so the fitness industry was um, really good to me for a really long time. And
Okay.
so once I started making really good money in the fitness industry, I didn't even see the need to continue to my education or go back to school.
Mhm. But that also brings me to a point too, like you said, you started when you're around 14, 15 years old, grade 9, grade 10. Not many kids at that age are working, um,
Right.
definitely not full-time jobs, let alone
No,
a
no, I
part-time
never
job.
worked through high
So
school.
now going through this and you start doing it, how are you funding this alcoholism? Because I'm sure you got to get the booze from somewhere. Now, were you just getting it from other people, or were you finding money? Did you start doing, like, I know with my friend Rob, he started getting into robbing cars and houses, not just to feed his addiction. I'm not saying you get that extreme, but
No, no, no,
how do
no.
you go to fund this? Because you're just a young kid still and you're not
Yeah, yeah.
working.
So when we were kids, um, and I remember we would all pitch in. It was like that kind of thing. Like, hey, everyone bring $10 and we all pitch in. And we were drinking the cheapest stuff that we could, which
Yeah.
was so gross. I think about it now and I'm like, oh my gosh, even the thought of it, it just turns my stomach. But yeah, it was just that kind of thing, like, hey, mom and dad, can I have $10 because we're all going to go out to eat
Yeah.
after, after the movies or whatever. So and then we would just kind of all pitch in and get the cheapest stuff that we could.
Yeah. And
So
back
and
then it
then,
was a lot cheaper than it is now.
right, right. And so it wasn't until I started working after high school at the gyms and managing gyms and things like that, was now I had my own money to buy the alcohol and the weed that I wanted to.
Exactly. No, that makes sense. I was just curious because I know I mean, I partied when I was in high school too, and we did the house
Right.
parties and all that kind of stuff. And you all, like you said, either pitch in or you have some money from your parents and you go and you buy 6 pack or something like that. Just something so you
Right.
have something to take with you in that. And
Right.
my daughters, it's funny because my youngest especially, like I might have like a little Ryan Coke or some whiskey or something there, and I'm like,
Mhm.
"Here, you want a sip?" I know she
Mhm.
doesn't want it because I know my
Uh-huh.
daughter's personality, and she's like, "No," she won't even go near it because she can't stand the smell of it. And I
Yep.
think I did that early on in life on purpose because then
Right.
she gets to high school, she doesn't want that stuff because she sees daddy and she
Right.
smells daddy's drinks or tastes a little sip of beer or something. It's like, "Oh, that's gross." And you've already turned them
Yeah.
off right then and there. Then it
Yeah.
becomes more of just a
John,
social aspect.
right. Yeah. Yeah. Regarding that, I know we'll talk a little bit more about the issues that I went through, but now being sober for 9 years,
Mhm.
almost 9 years, I have a part-time job at Longhorn Steakhouse in the
Okay.
evenings and on the weekends now. And when I'm picking up a tray of, wine glasses and mixed drink glasses, the whiff of it will just turn me off. I almost can't even stand to smell it anymore.
Okay.
I can be around it and people having drinks here and there. My
Yep.
husband maybe will have a drink on the weekend and it doesn't tempt me at all.
That's
If
good.
anything, if I get too close to it, um, I, I, I almost might get sick because
Okay.
it's just really that um, revolting to me.
Mhm. Is
And
it more
it's
of a
not a
cycle?
judgmental thing
No,
at
no.
all. It's not a judgmental thing on other people drinking. It's just the smell of it um, just does something to my stomach.
Is it more of a psychological thing because of what you went through, do you think? Or is it more you just don't like the smell of it and just it turns you off that way, you just done,
I
like,
think it's a
it's
little bit of both, John,
right?
because you know um, everything that I went through and the turmoil that I went through. I don't know. Maybe it's a blessing from God that I'm
Mhm.
affected, like that.
True.
But I'm sure it's a little bit psychological, but I think it's physical too. That I just got so physically sick
Mhm.
with it so many times that it's just my body's like, not that again.
Yeah, exactly. So going back to your 20s then, so you're out of college, you're working at this gym, or you're doing very well for yourself.
Yeah, I'm doing
I
pretty
take it you're
good.
still single at this time, or have you already met your husband at this time, or with some other person at this time?
Yeah, when I was in my early 20s, I was dating somebody pretty steadily for a few years. But I didn't meet my first husband until probably my later 20s or my mid oh no, I think I met my first husband when I was about 23, 24, something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I was doing really well. I was doing by this time I was managing at a gym and I was also um a personal trainer as well. So and I was able to function pretty well.
Mhm.
Even with the addiction, I was able to hide it
Yeah.
pretty well. So people around me in the workplace, they knew that I like to drink, but again, addicts are really good at manipulating the people around them.
Yeah.
So I was really good at hiding all of this from my coworkers and my family. So no one really knew what I was going through or what I was doing.
And yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to get to. That was one of my questions too, was how you were able to hide it because I know that especially with yourself, because you did this for a very long time. People don't realize that you were doing this for about good
20
30
years.
years or yeah, 20, 30
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
And and to be able to hide it, or people, they don't really, they, like you said, they probably thought you were just like a casual drinker. You like to go out and with the girls
Yeah,
after work and to have some drinks or whatever,
exactly.
but they didn't know how extreme it went.
Yes.
And they're very good at hiding it and making excuses that people can
Yes.
believe.
Yeah,
Did it
for
ever catch
sure.
up to you though in that kind of way that people finally realize, like, no, this is more than what you're saying?
Yes. Yeah. Because in the beginning, the earlier times, I would show up to parties and stuff like that and drink with them, but they didn't know I had already had X amount of drinks in my room at home by myself,
Mhm.
and then drank so much at the party, and then they didn't know that I drank more when I got home by myself,
Definitely.
so they saw maybe the glamorous part of it, the parties and the fun, but they didn't see um what was happening behind the scenes per se.
Exactly, and I know that when you get into stuff, you hear about, drug addicts that are, like, either on cocaine or heroin. When they do that first thing, they get that high, it's really great, and they start coming down again, they do it again, they get that high, but then they come back to normal, but after a while, that normal seems to become lower and lower, to the point that they, when they're off of it, they're so low that they need that fix just to get back to what you consider normal.
Yeah,
There's no more
yeah,
high anymore, it's just to relate. Did you find that that was happening with you, that because of
sure.
all the drinking, you're getting
Oh,
to the point you had to drink or else you felt terrible? And
oh,
did you do it
sure.
during work hours too? Like, is this where you go in the bathroom and sneak it, or did you bring it in your thermos, people thinking it's water, but really it's something else, that kind of a thing?
Yeah.
And I
One
might be
thing I
going really
remember,
extreme, but
yeah, no, one thing I remember was in my early 20s. I must have been um 19, 20, something like that. I was in a pageant, a local pageant. And so with this pageant, there was a couple of nights before the actual pageant show, we would do interviews with judges, and these judges were like just local community figures. And I mean, I remember clearly showing up to the interview drunk,
okay.
and no one had any idea. you know no one had any idea because it began to be my norm, and I was able to still pretty hold myself together pretty well at that point.
Okay.
um and then it wasn't until gosh, I must have been 22, 23, around there, my mid 20s, when I first got my did my first line of cocaine.
Okay.
And that was just, oh wow, we took it to another level. And every time that I tried a different drug, it was like, oh, this one's even more awesome than the one before,
Mhm.
and so there were, now that I had that addiction to cocaine, I mean, there were so many nights that um I would do some cocaine so I was able to drink more that night,
Okay. Okay.
and it just becomes,
To basically
gosh,
keep you awake for the night so that you can keep going.
isn't that, what kind of rationale is that?
No, I know.
Again, I think back now, and it's like, how was how was I thinking in that manner to think that was remotely
Now, do you
okay, or
think
how did that make sense to me at that time?
in a way the alcoholism, in your mind, you're probably going through it thinking like, "This is not harming me. I'm who I wanna be. I'm fine." When the other stuff comes, did it maybe want you to try the other stuff? Or did you just, "Well, I've done alcohol. It's been fine. I can get along, no problem. I can try this other stuff and see what it's like." And, like,
Yeah.
is there a rationale other than that? Like,
I think it started out more so, John, as like a curiosity,
okay,
because at that time, um, in my young adult years, again in my young 20s, mid 20s, um, there were a couple of people around me that would do cocaine, and it was like, again, I mentioned before, in a million years, John, if I weren't drunk, I probably would have never tried cocaine. But
Hmm.
you're already messed up. You're high from weed. You're drunk, and so I didn't think trying a line of cocaine was a big deal. It was like, well, they're doing it, and it looks
Yeah.
like they're having fun. And so it was just something that just started out of curiosity because I wanted to see what it was like.
So was it
And
more you actually going, "Hey, look what they're doing. I'm gonna go try that," or was it them saying, "Hey, do you want to try this?"
no, it was always me.
Okay.
Every drug that I ever did, John, it was never forced upon me.
Okay.
It was always like the alcohol. It was something that I wanted to try. The weed, it was something that I wanted to try. And the cocaine is like, huh, it looks it looks cool. It looks glamorous. It looks like
Yeah.
they're having an awesome time. So um it's that was just something else that I added to my arsenal.
Yeah. So it's like, look how amazing I feel when I'm drinking this and drinking that. I wonder how amazing I would feel if I did that or if I did this
Yeah.
also. Eh,
Yeah, just like you mentioned, the addict's mind is the alcohol and the weed wasn't enough for me anymore.
mhm.
Although I really was I was still addicted to it, and I loved it so much, but I needed another level
Okay.
of high
Yeah.
to be able to enjoy myself.
Okay. So it goes back to, like I said, with the drug addicts, that just to feel normal again, you got to take it again and again and again just to feel normal instead of you were not getting the high anymore. So now you're
Yeah,
trying something else because this other stuff is just making you feel normal.
yeah, yeah. I was
Or what
ready
you
to go to the
conceive is to
next
be
level.
normal. Yeah, okay. No, I totally understand that, not on a personal level, but on I've known people that are like that, and I can see where you're coming from, and
Right.
so this is going on through your 20s and into your 30s. Now, when do you meet your husband?
I met my first husband. Gosh, I think I was around 24,
Okay,
and um, he was very much opposite of what I was at that time. And I think part of me was I thought maybe this will help settle me down. So
okay,
part of me wanted to settle down, and part of me didn't, because he was very much conservative. He didn't even drink.
okay.
And so we got married and had my first son maybe a year or so later, a couple of years later. And my having my first son was like just so special to me, and I had such a close bond with this baby. I was so in love with this little boy.
Mhm.
And you would think that that would have been enough for me to say, all right, it's time for me to, shape up here. But when you're in such a deep state of addiction, your rationale is not normal.
Mhm.
And so um, this is where I really began being even more secretive with my addiction, because now I had to hide it from the person who I was living with. I had to hide it from my husband because uh, he wasn't a drinker. He wasn't a partier like the other people that were in my previous years.
Mhm.
And so there was always at least 5, 6, 7 empty bottles of wine under our sink because that's where I would hide them. Um, and then I wasn't smoking as much weed anymore at that time. So I began taking pills,
Okay.
because again, I needed something else. I needed
Mhm.
something else. So um, I would just abuse any pills that were in our household, muscle relaxers, primary painkillers, things like that. I began drinking a lot, very, very heavily, and then also taking a lot of pills at the same time.
Yes, which is, of course, very dangerous, of course. We've heard a
Oh
lot of
my
horror
God.
stories of stuff like that. Um, so when do now this is still with your first husband. Yeah, your children you came with your first husband or you had some with
So I had one son
okay.
in my first marriage, and then my second son, my next son with my second marriage, and then I have a stepson as well. So we
Oh,
have
okay.
three. I have three now. Um, but coupled with the addiction, John, came a lot of depression.
Oh,
I
I can
mean,
imagine.
really, really chronic depression.
Yeah,
And I think it was just a cycle. I was depressed, so I drank more and did more pills because I thought that would make me feel better.
sure.
It didn't make me feel better, so I got more depressed. And it was just over and over, just this cycle that I couldn't get out of.
And the
Um,
anxiety I can imagine you're going through because you're also trying to hide this from people like, "No, I'm fine. I don't have an addiction."
oh, I was just living a facade. I mean,
Yeah,
we had a beautiful house. He had a great career. We have this beautiful son, but I was really starting to be in a really dark place by that time.
mhm,
Um, and I began cutting myself. So one night, my son was asleep upstairs with his dad, and I go downstairs and I swallow 2 bottles of wine and a handful of pills, and I start cutting like I had before, and I cut myself so deep
mhm,
that I was rushed to the ER.
okay.
And the next morning, I literally woke up in a psychiatric rehab facility.
Now, was the cutting more of you were trying to hurt yourself or do something to yourself, or was it more a release? Because I know some people say they do the cutting, it's more of an energy release, it makes them feel better. Or was this more an attention thing, or was this more, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to end it?
It was never an attempt for suicide, never
Okay.
ever. Um, for me, I think I was so empty
Hmm.
and so hopeless and so numb. It was almost like this strange attempt to feel something
Yeah.
because I didn't feel anything. And so it was just this thing I did that made me know, okay, I guess I'm still alive. I'm feeling
Mhm.
something, and feeling something is better than feeling nothing.
Exactly. And was all of this, did this happen during your first marriage or your second marriage?
This happened during my first
Oh,
marriage.
okay. Now, did all
Um,
this have any effect on the ending of your marriage or
Absolutely. Absolutely. It just was obvious that we wanted different things out of life. And, you know, I've never been one to blame. It
Mhm,
wasn't his fault. It wasn't my fault. I had a problem and I don't think he understood that this was a sickness. This was an
mhm,
illness. This was a disease. And I think in his mind, to his defense, he wasn't educated on addiction and mental illness. So he thought that I was just kind of being defiant and,
yeah.
you know, and
And in your
so
mind, you're going through like you can't stop. This is your life. This is the way you've always lived your life, and you couldn't stop if you want to. In his mind, it's probably like if you really want to stop, you can just do it anytime, no problem.
exactly. And I
And
think
you
a
just don't
lot of
want
people
to
think
stop.
that. Yeah, a lot
Yeah.
of people think that of addicts. It's like, why are they doing this? Why don't they just stop? Why don't
Mhm,
they just stop? Um, but by that time, you are physically addicted
mhm.
and you are emotionally addicted.
Emotionally
And
and
then,
mentally. Yeah.
and mentally, I mean, this this depression was debilitating,
Yeah.
and so I was really, really sick for a long time. And so once I stayed 12 days in the psychiatric rehab facility, and once I was released, I relapsed shortly thereafter. And it wasn't long after that that we ended up getting a divorce.
Okay. So then, of course, you're probably going through even more depression after that because you
It
lost your
was,
marriage.
yes, and um, it wasn't that I was depressed because I lost my marriage. It was a very public divorce, John,
Okay.
because he was running for judge at that time.
Oh, okay.
So our divorce was very much like in the local
Sure.
newspaper, the local news. And, it was very traumatizing,
Hmm. Oh, I
and
can
so,
imagine.
oh gosh, I can easily and honestly say, John, that that was one of the worst times, if not the worst season of my life.
Hmm. And
I just wanted to sleep. I remember I just wanted it all to go away.
mhm.
So I went to live back with my parents, and we shared custody of our son.
Okay. And so then what is it at this time that you decide you want to get help or you want to stop, or do you get married again first and then
Yes. So, nope, I did not want help. And it's
okay.
crazy. It's crazy coming out of my mouth now. Um, I had a love-hate relationship with drugs and alcohol because I loved the feeling, and I loved, I was so attached to it.
Mhm.
But it was like I didn't know how to do life anymore without it. It was like this fear of losing this security that I had depended on most of my life by now. And
Mhm.
I didn't know how to socialize without being drunk and high. I didn't know how to um, live a normal life being sober. I didn't know how to do that. And so, even if I wanted to get um, help, it just was very scary for me to even think of doing life without this that I had depended on for so long.
Mhm. No, I can understand totally. So you get married to an amazing gentleman who I think you're married to right now.
Yes, yeah. So there was, just a few years. I think maybe, I don't know, 4 years or so, 3 or 4 years that I was single, and I met Reggie, and I met Reggie, and it was like this instant physical attraction for both of us, and we were just having a great time. And Reggie, we would get together with friends and drink, but he never had a problem. He was just
Mhm.
drinking socially.
Okay.
See, and I don't think he knew what he was dealing with as far as my addiction.
What he
You
was
know,
getting into.
yeah, he didn't know what he was getting into, and so we were just having a good time.
Yeah.
And 3 months later, I'm pregnant, and although we knew that we were falling in love, we had no intention of having a baby.
No.
At that time, we weren't planning it. But so it's funny now, and I even wrote a song about it. I'll have to send it to you, John. It's funny. I basically told Reggie, well, this is what we're gonna do. You're gonna marry me. Um, and so he's like, okay. And I think 15, 16 years later, it turned out okay. But
Exactly. He was
we got,
voluntold, as my
yes,
wife would say. You were voluntold.
that's right. That's right. So got married, and we had, so when I met Reggie, I had my first son, Jay, and he had his son, Fabian, they were just a couple of years apart. And
Okay.
then we had our third son together, and that's Massimo.
Okay. And I'm looking at a picture right now of you guys. You guys look amazing together.
Oh, yes,
Such a
yes,
good little
thank
family
you.
there. So
Yes.
so you get married
Yep.
and he still doesn't realize how far your addiction is. He just thinks you're a casual drinker like him.
Yeah, he just thinks, okay, this girl likes to party, no big deal.
Mhm.
So we have Massimo, and by the time we had Massimo, we had only been together about a year.
Mhm.
And most of that time I was pregnant, so I obviously wasn't drinking like I had been. So there was a short time when I was pregnant that things had pretty kind of calmed down a little bit,
Okay.
you know.
Yep.
And then after I had Massimo were the years that, again, the addiction and the depression just came back and came back even harder than
Okay.
what I had been dealing with before. And it got to the point where I had stopped working because I was so sick. Um, so Reggie would go to work every day in the morning, and I would basically, my life consisted, John, of me barely getting out of bed in the morning and barely getting the boys to school on time. And then me coming back still in my pajamas. And I would sit on this one same spot every day, this one single square cushion on our couch.
Mhm.
And by 10 a.m., whatever, I would start my day, start my drinking, and I would get drunk and cry most of the day. That was my life.
Okay. And before we get to the good parts and that, what how you decide not to do anymore, one last question I had was because it might be something that would help other ones is too is your first your two children that you gave birth to. Were you, I know the second one you said you toned it down a little bit during the pregnancy, but
Mhm.
during even the first one and that, were you still drinking and doing drugs while you were pregnant? Because I know a lot of people say that can have an effect on the baby after it's born and things like
Y-
that. Obviously, your children have grown up to be very well
Yeah,
rounded
no,
individuals, but I know I've heard stories. And I'm just curious on how
yeah,
that was, how you did when you were pregnant. Were you doing all this stuff while you were pregnant?
no, I thank God. I think with each of my pregnancies, I might have had a couple of glasses of wine.
Mhm.
Um, but for the most part, I was able to stop. And
Okay.
it's kind of strange. I guess it was just like a motherly sort of
Mhm.
intuition. I just didn't have a problem when I was pregnant. It
Okay.
wasn't until, I after I had the babies that I was like, all right, it's time to party again. It's time to, but
Mhm.
during my pregnancies, I seem to have been able to stop with no problem.
And the reason I asked that is because we're going to get now into how you became sober in that, but I
Yeah.
wonder if that had an effect on helping you to become sober, knowing you could do it. Because if you could do it while you were pregnant and just cut it off, maybe that was a
Um,
way psychologically in your mind saying, "Hey, I've done it before. I can do it again." And I could be
you know,
totally wrong. It was just kind of a little thing in my
yeah,
brain there.
you would think that, John, because that makes total sense, right? What you just said, it makes total sense. But in my mind at that time, um,
It's more a
I
maternal instinct.
yeah, aside from being pregnant, I didn't think I had the strength to be sober. I
Okay.
thought I was hopeless. I thought I had come to believe that, well, this is who I'm supposed to be, an overweight, sloppy drunk. That's who I am. And I
Mhm.
just accepted that. So in my mind, it, it wasn't even worth trying. Even trying, John, was so exhausting.
Mhm.
Even thinking about going through the steps of getting sober was so exhausting. I mean, you're talking about someone that who could hardly even get off the couch,
Yeah.
so getting sober wasn't even something that I was remotely interested in even trying.
Okay. So you finally get to a point where you're around 38 years old. What puts you to that point where you're like, I can't do this anymore. I actually have to stop. And
Well,
I got to do what I have to do that.
it got to the point where I really, really thought, John, that I wasn't going to survive this disease.
Okay.
Um, I never had a plan for suicide, but I wished that I had never been born.
Mhm.
Um, and I knew that some way, somehow, I was either going to end up dying, whether through an accident or something,
Or
or I
medical
was going
reasons.
to, yep, or I was going to go to prison.
Yeah.
Those were my options, and I had accepted that, and I began preparing Reggie for that realization, for that
Mhm.
possibility, and I would tell him, babe, I remember one conversation so vividly. Um, he came home from work and I was sitting at the dining room table and I said, babe, I want you to take care of the boys when I'm gone. And this cool, strong, tattooed up guy, just seeing his reaction to that and him just dropping down to his knees and putting his head and arms in my lap and begging me not to leave him. It's just something that I'll never forget. And it was so painful, even to this day, thinking about the pain that I inflicted on my family and the person who I love the most.
Yeah.
It still hurts a lot, but I think that was around the time that even though I thought I was done, God had other plans for me.
Yeah. That was almost like a turning point for you right there.
That was
just
the turning point.
just seeing him like that.
Yes. And so one day, shortly thereafter, got the boys to school. The day started out as it usually does. Reggie goes to work. I get the boys to school. I come home on my couch and start drinking. And for some reason, John, I don't know why, this picture of a Bible the boys had brought home from church camp came into my mind. They had just got home from church camp a couple of weeks ago. And I remember seeing a teen's Bible in their duffel bag that they had been given. And so I got up and I finally found it in a duffel bag. It was still in the duffel bag under Jay's bed. And I grabbed it and brought it back to my couch, back to my cushion, and just started flipping through pages. I had no intention of stopping on a particular page or reading anything in specifically. I just started flipping through pages and I stopped and started reading wherever my eyes landed. And I landed on Proverbs 23 verses 31 and 32 that said, "Don't gaze at the wine when it sparkles in the cup and how smoothly it goes down, because in the end it bites like a poisonous snake and it stings like a viper." And it wasn't only those words. Something happened to me physically. Something happened. Those words were not just words on the page. They became alive at that moment. And I felt this warm sensation envelop my entire body. And I just knew that something had shifted inside of me. I just knew it.
And you had to make a change.
And I knew it was time. And so for the next few hours, I was like, I couldn't wait for Reggie to get home to tell him, And so a few hours later, I remember I heard his truck coming into the driveway, and I couldn't wait. So I went outside to the driveway, which I hadn't done in probably years, right? And he must have seen this transition in my face and the way I carried myself, the way I was even talking. I was different. And as soon as he opened the truck door, I said, "Babe, something happened to me today. And I think I had an encounter with God, and I want to follow him, and I want to change." And John, without a second of hesitation, he was like, "I'll follow him too, babe. I want to follow him," because he saw this hope again. He saw the woman that he had fell in love with again. And so that was the point where I said, "Okay, we're gonna start this." And a couple of days later, immediately, really, I found a church, that we could all go together. And I met these mentors who kind of brought me under their wing, and I began developing a personal relationship with God and reading the Bible and applying scripture to my life. And it was a season of recovery and healing for not just myself, but for my entire family.
And I know where you're coming from, because I I believe words and things are very powerful, and I believe certain things and certain people come in and out of your life for a reason. And
Yes.
anybody who knows my story, I mean, there's a couple podcasts I've been on where I've told my story, and I know my late 20s, it was actually words from a song that made me change my
Mm,
direction of my life, where
mm,
I was basically living my life very safe, the 9 to 5 or blah blah blah. But
yes.
these song lyrics I heard one day, it made me change my thought process to the
Right.
point that I was willing to start taking more chances in life and do things for me, because
Mm,
it was just something that powerful that just stuck with me. After it was shortly after, maybe within about 6 months to a year after a car accident I had. So
wow.
I believe that sometimes certain things or certain thoughts, some people, they
Right.
come into your
Yes.
life for a reason and some leave for a reason. And it does
Absolutely.
change your perception. And I think it made my
Yes.
life a lot better. Not that I had a bad life before, but it
Right.
changed the way that I wanted to live my life as a person. So I can see where
Yes.
you're coming from. For me, it was lyrics from a song. For you, it was words in the scripture. So it
Right.
doesn't matter where it comes from. It could be coming from your next door neighbor. It could be come somewhere. Something sometimes
Yep.
just triggers people. And it's like, you know what?
Yes.
I see where I got to go now. And
Yes.
it seemed to lead you on a path that you needed to go, that we're happy that you did, because look at you now.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Yes. And so the next the next few years, I knew that if I wanted true change in my life, it was going to be up to me. You know, I know that God was the one, he healed me, but it was going to be up to me to do the hard work in
Hmm.
terms of getting healthy and strong again, spiritually, physically, mentally. And so that was a journey in of itself. Um, and that led me to where I am today.
That's amazing. Why don't we talk a little bit more about where you are today? And
Yes.
of course, you and I met through our friend Sarah Lyons, who
Yes.
you've known for a while, and you did an
Yes.
actual Epic Destination photo shoot with her for her Epic Destinations magazine and her Bodyscape Fitness magazine. That's how we
Yes.
met. And if anybody wants to check that out, you can just message to me or go to Facebook, or actually you can just go on to YouTube. It's youtube.com/at onset SJ. And I can
Yes.
put it in the
Yep.
comments, wherever. If you go there, you can see our episode we actually have with you on there, and they can learn more about that side of you and your fitness part of you.
Yes.
But why don't we talk a little bit about what you are doing today to keep yourself happy and keep yourself going? Because we have a couple of different websites we can throw up there for people.
Yeah.
Let's try
So
and.
in 2016, I opened a business, and
Mhm.
it's a medical exercise and fitness business. It's called Lift by Selina. So as a medical exercise specialist, I design and implement workout programs for clients with medical conditions. And it's based out of my home. I have a professional facility in my backyard. And so the clients come here, or I also do training online as well. So that began in 2016. And then more recently, I began speaking. I knew that I wanted to be able to tell my story in an effective way. And so I went through a year-long mastermind with Bo Easton's program, and I began to learn how to tell my story on stage. And that led to me becoming now a speaker. And so just last month, September 2023, I was invited to do my first TEDx speech. And so I did that in Huntington Beach, California. Um, and I'm also doing other things. I'm writing and recording my own songs with a platinum award-winning artist, Drew Lawrence. And that's my speaker and coach website there. And so now I've just dedicated my speaking and my services to helping clients overcome their barriers to reach their health, weight loss, and fitness goals.
That's amazing. And I'm
Yeah.
just, as you were talking, of course, if anybody's listening to the audio version of this, we're showing some of her website on here right now, both her websites. So if anybody does want to check out any of her stuff, you can always go to Selina Lopez Inaosa. We can put
Yes.
the link in there for you, .com, of course. And then, of course, her business page, which is liftbyselina.com. And I
Yes.
showed a little bit of that too. Go check it out. And I'm sure she would be there to help you out if you ever need it. But you also, why don't we talk about, there's a book that you wrote or a
Yes.
portions for a book.
Yes. My first book just came out a few weeks ago, and it's called Hello Success. And it's an anthology book. So I write a chapter in the book, and it's really just my journey of what I have gone through in my life, the problems, the issues that I've overcome with addiction and mental illness, and how the journey that I took to become the woman that I am today. And I really give some really practical steps on what other people can do if they're ready for a transition in their life.
Definitely. And I'll be sure that when we post this on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook page, we'll try and remember to put the link that they can go and purchase this book. I've actually got the download of the book, but I'm actually, you and I were sitting there, we were talking about how I was going to go purchase it just before we went on the air, and I was having some issues there. But
Yes,
I
yes.
will
So
put
we'll
the
have to
link
get
down
that
there.
resolved.
We'll get that resolved for sure, because I think it's a great book for people to go check out. I did get to read just a little bit excerpts here and there, but I haven't read the whole thing yet. So
Hmm.
I'm definitely going to buy my paperback version, and then when I do meet you in
Yes.
person, we're going to get you to sign it, of course.
Perfect.
And
Yes, yes.
and I think it'd be very cool for people to go pick it up, listen to it, and I would like to, before we end, one thing I like to always do with people is I like to try and get you to give us maybe some last words to the viewers out there, something that comes to your mind. But before I go to that, actually, now that I think of it, one thing I wanted to ask you is if you could, this is the first time I've ever thought of this, but if you could right now go back to that 14, 15-year-old girl, what is something you would tell them right now?
Yes. If I could talk to 14, 15-year-old Selena, I would tell her to not be afraid to be who you are and who God designed you to be, and not try to adjust, right, to the environment, to the people around you. Um, and not to worry if you're different or if you don't fit in into the crowd that you're surrounded by. To stay true to yourself and stay true to the path that you know that God has put in front of you.
I think that's words, excuse me, my throat there. I think
Mhm.
that's words that everybody can live by too, not just your 14-year-old self. Because I was going to ask
Yes.
you, like I always end with, give a little bit of words of wisdom as we do, or some little last thought you'd like to tell our viewers. I don't know if you have anything else you would like to say, or if it
Sure.
was that you said there. But if you have anything else that you would love to tell our viewers, just some last words on anything that
Yes.
comes to mind.
Well, this quote that I have in my book is, what you choose to do today can change the whole trajectory of your life. And so I know that for me, and it could be a positive or a negative thing. So it's really about being mindful of everything that you do each day of your life, each moment of your life, um, because it can affect the rest of your life.
hmm Very true. Very good words to live by. And I hope a lot of people get a lot from this story, because I even learned, I mean, you and I, like I said, we did a podcast before. It was more the
Yep.
fitness side. We did our interview a couple weeks ago before we did this show. And even today, I learned a lot more today than I did in that interview too. And that's what I love
Yes.
about these shows, is I get to learn more about you guys. And I'm very humbled that you're willing to come on and share some of that personal story with us. I'm hoping,
Yes.
I
My
know it will.
pleasure.
Yeah, and I know it'll help a lot of people out there, because the one thing I can definitely say is, one thing I always notice is when you talk about alcoholism, it always seems people, when you say you're talking about an alcoholic, the first thing that goes to people's minds are males and men. I don't think they
Mm.
always integrate it that females can go through this too. And I
Yes,
think
absolutely.
just telling your
Um,
story is going to help a lot of females out there that are
yes.
maybe going through this.
Yes, yeah. Addiction is not prejudice at all. It can
No,
affect any gender, any economic status. It doesn't matter. Unfortunately, who you are, where you come from. Um, Addiction can affect anyone.
exactly. So I thank you for coming, sharing your story.
Oh yes,
And
thank you so much for having me.
No, definitely. And you and I are definitely going to keep in touch, but hopefully, maybe
Yes.
sometime in the future when we start going through some of our old episodes, maybe you'll come back on again in the future. We'll do a little all-star cast with a lot of our ex-guests and see how everybody's
Oh,
doing now
yeah.
after you left our show, what's went on in your life, and get to know more about what's going on in your life and how you're doing. So maybe you'd come
That would
back
be
and share that with
awesome.
everybody.
Yes.
Perfect. Well, till next time, I hope everybody enjoyed this episode, and be sure to tune in for the next one where we again have another awesome guest that'll try to motivate, empower, and inspire you to be the best and live the best life that you can. So until next time, we'll talk to you later. And remember, if anybody asks, say the butler did it.